And we begin this hour of KXEL Live and Local on a Thursday by connecting via Zoom with a return guest to the program. Here we are in the early days of May, and that means there is a brand new issue of Iowa History Journal just out, available on the newsstands now. Third issue for calendar year 2024. The publisher and owner of Iowa History Journal is Michael Swanger. He joins us now. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Jeff. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me back on your show.
It is always a pleasure and privilege to talk to you because the items that are in the magazine, the articles and the columns, always such a wide variety of topics. For those who may not be familiar with our conversations a half dozen times a year, each time a magazine comes out, what's the goal when you say to someone that you are the owner and publisher of Iowa History Journal? How do you explain that to people in terms of what the content is?
Well, in essence, Jeff, we are the only popular statewide publication devoted exclusively to Iowa's history. So that's it in a nutshell. And I think folks who have seen the magazine, whether or not they're regular readers or subscribers or not, I would hope by now have a sense that in our 16th year that we offer a variety of subjects for every issue. And we feel that there's at least one subject in every issue that should touch on every Iowan. And that's been a long-held recipe for the magazine that, no pun intended, I subscribe to here too as a small business owner. And I think it's been a model of success for us in that regard, because we do try to appeal to all Iowans of all ages, regardless of their interests.
And one of the things that I have found is that, most of the time I don't know anything about one of the topics or one of the articles. But even B, if I do know something about it, I learn something more. In other words, this is not just the same sort of cut and paste that you've seen in the past, perhaps in other contexts. The cover is a photograph of a very earnest-looking gentleman by the name of Clifton Olson. And Iowa has a great aviation history. You know, the first airplane flight was taken by a guy named Art Hartman in Burlington in 1910. The Wright brothers lived in Cedar Rapids for a period of time, but Clifton Olson took it to a different level.
Yeah, he certainly did. To use our headline there, Clifton Olson, like a bolt from the blue, turned into become one of the most renowned aviators, not only in Iowa history, but in the history of our nation. He was a stunt pilot who barnstormed the Midwest. He delivered airmail. He trained cadets and tested airplanes for 2 world wars. He did everything. He was born in 1899 in McGregor, and he always had an interest in airplanes at a young age. And it was DMAC history professor Matthew Walsh who wrote the story for us, and he dug into the archives at the Iowa Aviation Museum to find out more about him. And like you, especially regarding this particular story, Jeff, I learn something new every time a new issue comes out. I had no idea about Clifton Olson or his history, and what an amazing history it was to discover, to learn. And Matthew does an incredible job of telling it in such a riveting way that it's exciting to just kind of turn the page on this story, because there's so many things that he accomplished in his career that we could probably spend the entire show just talking about him. But certainly happy to touch on some of the highlights of his distinguished career.
Well, this was at a time when stunt individuals, I was going to say stunt pilots, but then I was going to point out that he would walk on the wing of the airplane. Well, you're not a pilot at that point. I'm not sure how to describe that. Common sense apparently left the building, but there are photographs, again, the plane is in flight and he's outside the cockpit or he's walking on the wings. I mean, this is something that you have to keep in mind. This was in the very early days of airplanes. And so the whole thing was a mystery to people.
Absolutely, because we're just to give your listeners a frame of reference, we're talking about the early 20th century.
Yeah.
So he became the youngest pilot in our nation's history at age 18, just to give you an idea. He started flying planes when he was 13 years old. Again, he was born in 1899. And so after he got his aviation license, he went to work for the U.S. military, and he was even at a young age, but he was so skilled that they didn't even send him overseas. They left him here to train older pilots. That's how good he was. And after the war, he went on to make a living barnstorming the Midwest as a stunt pilot. And that goes back to what you were talking about, Jeff, which was that he would do outlandish feats like walking the wings of the plane while it was 800 feet in the air. And this is back in 1924. We have photos of this from the 20s, which is incredible that they even exist. But we have a couple of great pictures. One of them is of Clifton holding onto the plane just by his teeth. He's literally suspended in air, holding onto the plane with his teeth. And this, again, this is, 800 feet above the ground over Benton in 1924. There's another shots of him walking the wings of the airplane. We have another shot that year of him executing an incredible exchange from a motorboat to a Lincoln Standard plane at 45 miles an hour on Lake Okoboji. I wouldn't even attempt that with today's technology. Can you imagine trying to do that 100 years ago? So he was an amazing individual.
And it occurs to me, and perhaps if you're there at the beginning, the dawn of a new industry, a new technology, something like this, you may not be scared of it like we may be today because it's new, you're inventing it. And again, back then, the planes were ones you could assemble through kits at home or something that you could make. It was a much different time, but it still took an awful lot of guts to climb out of the cockpit on that thing.
No doubt. There's another portion of our story that Matt delves into, which is interesting. This kind of highlights how delicate these planes are. Remember, these are wooden frame planes. There was at one point in his career, this is around 1924, he was in Nebraska and he was grounded from a hailstorm which pierced about 300 holes into the cloth wings of his plane. And there was no repair shop for hundreds of miles around. So what did he do? He started walking around and hit up all the farmers for their cotton towels and eggs. Why? Because he would soak those cotton towels into egg whites and use those to patch the holes on the wings of his plane. He learned that as a child when he was putting kits together and model planes. So he's quite ingenious in that way too. Later on, he went to serve again, served our nation during World War II, again, testing planes, training pilots, and then he came back to Iowa and just made a career out of working at different places. He worked at the Ottumwa Airport. He did stunt shows and barnstorming and things. He died in 1969, but it sounds to me, based on everything I read in Matt's story, he had no fear, which obviously probably was the first requisite to become a stunt pilot back in those days.
Well, and again, he was a sportsman, and when he and his wife would decide to go fishing, they didn't just drop a boat off of the back of a trailer, now did they?
No, they didn't. Well, if you could fly, why not? Just go ahead and land your plane there on the river, whether it's on the Mississippi or the Missouri. We have another good picture there too of he and his second wife of them fishing, Esther in Clifton. And I think of the photos from 47, but that was his way of relaxing, was fishing, and that's what they enjoyed to do as a couple. And credit to not only Clifton but his wife as well, and his first wife, for having the kind of the wherewithal to go along with them on some of these things too, because Esther was always there with him in the plane. Pretty amazing.
A Bolt from the Blue, stunt pilot Clifton Olson, the cover story of the new issue of Iowa History Journal, online iowahistoryjournal.com. The magazine available at all manner of places. If you go on the website, you can see a listing of them. Michael Swanger is the owner and publisher of Iowa History Journal. He joins us on News Talk 1540 KXEL. If I don't go to the website and I want to know where to go pick up a copy, or if I'm a subscriber and want a couple of extra copies for friends, a short list of where we generally can find it across the state.
We're sold at every Barnes& and Noble in the state and most Hy-Vee stores. So I encourage folks to go to those two places, especially to find the magazine. And then, as you said, on the website, we have a list of stores available in each city across the state. But those are the two primary sources, in addition to our website.
There's another part of Iowa's history that I think is underreported to some degree, and it has to do with the role of women and famous firsts. And we can go back to female lawyers and female doctors, etc. Well, female politicians or those involved with the political process, they were blazing trails as well. One in particular that I recall from my younger days, just growing up and watching politics on TV, and they said there's a lady from Iowa holding the gavel. Well, that was a big deal.
That was a big deal. I think this story would certainly be in your wheelhouse, Jeff, given your expertise and your experience over the years of what you do on radio. We're talking about the remarkable career of Mary Louise Smith, Madam Chairman, if you will. She was the first female chair of the Republican National Committee. She was named to that position in the fall of 1974 when President Ford chose her, and she retained that position as chair of the RNC from 1974 to 1977, which obviously, if you have any concept of politics during that time, probably not the easiest period for not only women in politics at that time, but especially at that time with what the country was going through, and in particular the Republican Party. She was an amazing woman. She was born in Eddyville in 1929. She got interested in politics a little later in life, in the 50s, basically after her children were grown and gone to college. She started working at the grassroots, the local levels with the Republican Party, and went on to hold that esteemed position as chairman of the National Committee. But she worked side by side, as you know, Jeff, with so many incredible, influential Republican leaders. And we have some great photos in the story written by Timothy Walsh from the University of Iowa. One of my favorites is the one of her with Ronald Reagan at the Republican convention in Miami of 1972. We have that photo. We have another great photo of her with Nixon and George H.W. Bush. And it was, as you know, it was Bush who appointed her as co-chair of the RNC on March 25th of 1974. There's a great shot of her with a gavel with Bush, and then another shot of her with Ford in the Oval Office. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of what that story has to offer, and to learn more about her amazing career in politics.
Well, again, as you point out, what an interesting time in politics, 1974 through the 76 election, et cetera, and to be the one presiding over one of the two major parties post Watergate. I mean, just a phenomenal thing. And even after that period ended, she certainly wasn't just sitting at home. One of the founders of the Iowa Women's Archives, which has become such a tremendous repository for history, located at the University of Iowa.
Yeah, in addition to that, she also was appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission in 1982, and she served time with that commission for 2 years. And then she also focused some other efforts later on with, as you mentioned, well, the Iowa Peace Institute in 1985. And this led to an appointment from Bush during his presidency to serve on the U.S. Peace Institute in 1990. I mean, she just didn't sit still. She was a dynamo, and really an amazing woman and leader, in the sense that she was very much considered a moderate at the time. When Reagan won the presidency, the party started to turn further to the right, and she kind of maintained her moderate viewpoints, but worked closely with Reagan and Bush and the others who followed, always supported the Republican ticket. But it's incredible when you think about what the party went through after what happened with Nixon. She was there to help pick up the pieces and kind of gather everything together and make sure that the party was moving forward. So I don't think she gets the credit that she deserves for the work that she did for the party back then.
Certainly was a pivotal time, and we don't recognize it, perhaps, those of us who lived through it, but it was a very pivotal time for the future of the party itself in the aftermath of a president resigning. Iowa History Journal is the magazine. May-June issue is out. You get it wherever you get magazines. Better yet, go online and subscribe, iowahistoryjournal.com. 6 issues a year. Michael Swanger is the owner and publisher. And I'm just going to ask this bluntly. Have you ever met a baseball story you didn't like?
What would give you that idea, Jeff?
I don't know. We're doing this on Zoom and you're dressed in full uniform, I think. But we've told the story in Iowa Almanac of the Keokuk Westerns, the pro baseball team. And I think that story comes up again this weekend on Almanac on KXEL. But that's 1904, as I remember. You've got a story now that predates even that.
Well, just by a year, but we'll call it the same ballpark to use
As it
the
were.
slogan. Yeah, as it were. That's right. Well, retired University of Iowa professor David Jepson had pitched a story to me about a year ago about the Algona Brownies. I'd heard about the Algona Brownies. They were an all-black baseball team. They were, I think they began in 1898. I could be wrong on that year, but right in that area. And for at least a period from 1898 to at least 1902. In fact, the Brownies roster always included at least two black players. In 1902, it was predominantly a black team. In 1903, there were 11 players on the team that were black players. But what was amazing about this team was not only the location, concerning the population, that there weren't very many black residents in Kossuth County at the time, but the fact that the owners put the ball club together by recruiting players from Chicago, from the two predominant black baseball teams in Chicago at the time, who were feuding at the time over leases on where to play and fields and contracts, etc. So Algona benefited because they were able to pick up a lot of ball players who wanted to play and didn't want to sit out a season. They went on to become, Jeff, as our headline suggests, they dominated the 1903 season, and they went on to become what was known then as the colored champions of the West. And in 1903, just to give your listeners some perspective, that was the first year of the World Series. That's when Boston, when they were known as the Americans, defeated the Pittsburgh Pirates in a best-of-9 series, 5-3. So at the time, okay, there was a World Series with Major League Baseball, but black baseball was huge. It was a big business, and there were great players and great teams. I think anyone who knows the history of the game knows that. And this Algona team actually goes down in the history books as one of the best to ever take the field.
And what's interesting is they win the title. They are the best ever, and there's no chance to repeat because the team disbanded the following year.
Exactly. And a lot of that was because the teams in Chicago got their act together and they decided they could work together regarding all the business aspects of baseball. And so, yeah, it's sad that they didn't get a chance to defend their title. They were very good in 1902 as well. But this story focuses specifically on their 1903 season. And there's some great anecdotes in here about all the teams that they played from not only Iowa, but the Midwest and the things that they went through, and even some great bench clearing brawls. I mean, it's a fun story.
The Algona Brownies dominating the 1903 season. One of the owners was a fellow named Gardner Coles Sr., who, after he was done with the baseball team, bought the Des Moines Register. And that family legacy and dynasty and the broadcasting and print empire came from there. Fantastic stuff, as always, in Iowa History Journal, as well as what we've talked about. The publisher has a column on D-Day, Arvid Huseman with a column about summer reunions, and much more. It's iowahistoryjournal.com. Iowa History Journal, May-June issue available now. Michael Swanger, thanks so much for the time. As always, we'll talk when the next issue comes out, if not before.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Jeff.
This is News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk.